The Furutaka class of heavy cruisers consisted of two ships, the Furutaka and the Kako. The Furutaka class was the first design of heavy cruisers in the Imperial Japanese Navy and was also called the A-class cruisers. Like the Yubari, it was designed by Yuzuru Hiraga and Fujimoto Kikuo. It was meant to beat the US Navy's Omaha class and the Royal Navy's Hawkins class. Furutaka and Kako were laid down on the 5th of December 1922 and were commissioned on the 31st of March 1926 and the 20th of July 1926, respectively. After completion, they both joined the 5th Squadron and conducted training and patrol missions in the Chinese Sea until the mid-1930s. In 1936 and 1937 respectively, both ships received a major overhaul. Their 6 single-mount 200mm guns were replaced by 3 twin-turret mounts of 203mm guns, and their 3x2 torpedo mounts were replaced with 2x4 torpedo mounts of Type 93s. During the early stages of World War II, both ships were assigned to Cruiser Division 6 in support of the invasion of Wake Island, and later in support of Imperial Japanese troop landings on Rabaul. Furutaka and Kako participated in the Battle of the Coral Sea, protecting carriers Shoho and Shokaku unsuccessfully. During the Battle of Savo Island, Furutaka and Kako took part in a night battle that caused the sinking of the USS Astoria, Quincy, Vincennes, and the HMAS Canberra. After the battle, Cruiser Division 6 was ordered back to Kavieng for repairs on the 10th of August 1942. Underway, they were ambushed by the USS S-44 submarine, which fired 4 torpedoes at the rear ship, which happened to be Kako. She was struck 3 times near her aft magazine and boiler rooms, and within 5 minutes, rolled over and exploded. Most of the crew was rescued by the remaining ships, but 35 crewmen died. On the 12th of October 1942, during the Battle of Cape Esperance, Furutaka was struck by a torpedo and about 90 shells, some of which ignited her torpedoes. She sank stern first, only hours later. 33 crewmen died and 150 were captured by US Navy forces. Both ships were struck from the Naval Vessel Registrar on the 15th September and 10th November 1942. When comparing the Furutaka stats, it's important that we look at both the Omaha and the Murmansk, as both of them are very good Tier 5 cruisers. Hit point wise, the Furutaka doesn't look so bad, 30,700 hit points compared to the Omaha and Murmansk's 26,800. However, the problem with the Furutaka, just with a lot of the Japanese ships, is that it has a big citadel area with a sizable chunk of citadel above the waterline. This makes it very easy to hit when you're side on, and with how the Furutaka's gun layout works, you kind of have to be side on to actually do damage to your opponents. Both the Omaha and the Murmansk are alright in their citadel hit zones, having quite a big one above the waterline behind the aft main battery. However, that is a very small hit zone compared to the Furutakas. Speed-wise, all 3 of these ships end up being pretty similar, at least in top speed. However, in turning circle, the Omaha and Murmansk just absolutely leave the Furutaka out to dry. 750 meters just is not that impressive at Tier 5, and its 8.6 second rudder shift time doesn't make matters any better. The Omaha with its 7.5 second shift time is already a little bit sluggish sometimes. And obviously the Murmansk with its 5 second rudder shift time and 590 meter turning circle is an absolute legend at Tier 5 and might as well be considered a destroyer. Now the Furutaka does have a slightly better surface detection range, but 12.2 kilometers isn't amazing. It's alright, but destroyers will still spot you long before you spot them. Honestly, none of these ships really impress with their concealment. Now the gun situation is where we start seeing all the problems with the Furutaka class. It is worth mentioning that it's the lowest tier cruiser in the game to have 203mm guns. And while that is impressive and lets you fire AP ammunition against even some of the lower tier battleships in the game that you're going to face, it does mean that it has to be somehow balanced, and Wargaming went a little bit overboard here. Having only a rate of fire of 3.5 rounds per minute really hurts the Furutaka. That is much too slow for a cruiser, especially when it's on the same tier as the Omaha and the Murmansk, both of which have 8.6 rounds per minute with their 152mm guns. With 13 kilometers, the Furutaka doesn't look too bad in the gun range department, but is of course completely outclassed by the Murmansk with its base range of 14.8 kilometers and the unique ability to launch a scout plane, which increases its very accurate range to 17 kilometers. The alpha damage on the Furutaka's AP ammunition is really nice, and if you can get those citadel hits against other Japanese cruisers and even some of the American cruisers, you have the opportunity to absolutely wreck them. However, because of the low rate of fire, your DPS is absolutely abysmal. The Furutaka has one of the lowest cruiser DPS in the game. And that really hurts it, especially when it has to be compared against the Omaha that has, with 3500 DPS, quite a solid amount of damage behind its guns. And to top it all off and make matters even worse, the Furutaka has a 45-second turret traverse time. You have to maneuver so much in the Furutaka to not just get absolutely destroyed, that having such a slow turret traverse time works even more against you. All three of these cruisers still get torpedoes, and all of them are equipped with relatively fine torpedoes. I will say, however, that the range on the Furutaka and Omaha's torpedoes is very limiting. The Murmansk with its 8-kilometer range torpedoes will have many more opportunities to actually use them, as opposed to Furutaka and Omaha, who are a little bit more limited in how and when they can use their torpedoes effectively. But when you can use your torpedoes in the Furutaka, boy are they ever awesome. 14,600 damage is nothing to sneeze at. That's a higher damage than the Minikaze's torpedoes do at tier 5. 63 knots speed is also very nice and makes it much more difficult for the opponent to dodge your torpedoes. However, do remember that you only have 6 kilometers range. The Furutaka's anti-aircraft capabilities are absolutely pitiful. With a total of 22 anti-aircraft DPS at 1.5 kilometers, yeah, you're not really shooting down any planes unless they're circling above you like a couple of deranged vultures. Both the Omaha and the Murmansk, being American designs, have of course much better anti-aircraft systems. And with 84 and 109 DPS respectively, they're much more suited to actually killing aircraft that are attacking friendly battleships. It is interesting to note that the Furutaka so far is the only cruiser at tier 5 that has secondary guns. However, it's only 220mm guns per side, and they have 4-kilometer range, which isn't really the kind of range that you want to be at in the Furutaka because it is so squishy. So the secondary guns don't really ever seem to come into effect, at least not for me. Maybe they do for other people, but I find them pretty damn useless. Now on to the completely arbitrary and rather silly scoring that I like to do at the end of these stat sections. And first off, in the category of survivability, the Omaha and Murmansk definitely take the point, because while they do have less hit points, their citadels aren't so gigantic and easy to hit. The category of speed absolutely goes to the Murmansk. I'm not entirely sure what the Soviets did with this ship when they leased it from the Americans, but maybe Soviet sailors are just so much better than American sailors. Either way, the Murmansk definitely performs, and that's really all we care about, isn't it? In concealment, none of these ships score. While the Furutaka has a slightly better surface detection range, 12 kilometers at tier 5 just is not good. It's nothing worth fussing over, and giving a point for something that isn't even good would be entirely unreasonable. Guns obviously goes to the Omaha and the Murmansk, because they are both absolutely adequately armed at tier 5 to deal with pretty much anything that comes across them, and they can really put their DPS to use with HE ammunition against battleships, with HE ammunition against destroyers, and with AP ammunition against other cruisers. The 203mm guns on the Furutaka just do not end up doing all that much for you. And while it's interesting design to have these guns earlier in the Japanese tree, right now it really only serves to make this Furutaka a worse ship. However, I must stress that Wargaming has already said they're going to buff the Furutaka, and guns is going to be one of the big categories that they're focusing on. It's going to get a better rate of fire, and it's going to get better turret traverse speed. So make of that what you will. I have no idea when this is going to happen, but it's been announced, so it hopefully is going to happen at some point. Now in torpedoes, all three of these ships score, and while the Murmansk does have slightly better torpedoes than the other two, simply due to its range, I do feel that the torpedoes really do add something to the Furutaka and the Omaha as well. I've played plenty of games where I actually caused 30-40,000 damage with my torpedoes alone, and that is definitely nothing to sneeze at. Anti-aircraft obviously also goes to the Omaha and the Murmansk. Being US ships, they got more anti-aircraft during World War II, and they have alright anti-aircraft power for tier 5. And secondaries? Nah, sorry, not for 2 guns on a ship that really doesn't want to get that close. And so the final score is 1 point for the Furutaka, 4 for the Omaha, and 5 for the Murmansk. Now remember that these scorings are very arbitrary and don't really mean all that much most of the time, but in this case I do feel that it adequately represents the power level at tier 5. Alright, time to watch some clips. The first thing I want to highlight about the Furutaka is that the AP ammunition really is pretty awesome. As you can see, this Kuma foolishly presents his side to me, and I fire my first salvo. The first 3 shots are for ranging, and then 3 more, and boom, I do over 10,000 damage to him, dropping him by half. My next salvo is reloaded, and he foolishly turns side onto me again, which allows me to put more hits into his citadel, and leave him at 10% after only 2 salvos. Another strength of the Furutaka is of course the torpedoes, and you can do some really sneaky stuff with them. Like for example, I spot this Aoba that is driving around within torpedo range but behind the island. And I keep checking with the torpedoes and see, alright, he's coming in my direction. He disappears, but I sort of judge where I have to fire the torpedoes and, you know, where they would end up. And I do a little bit of a foolish thing in just presenting my side to him, because he is aiming at me, he was looking at me as well, and he hits me and does a lot of damage. I turn away, but my torpedoes are absolutely on target and they punch into him, taking him out. And luckily I actually survive his second salvo. Whew. But that is sadly where the good things about the Furutaka end, because the Furutaka is a big target made of paper with huge showing citadels. And just look at this. These people are firing high explosive ammunition at me. I wait with my first repair kit, but not long enough, and repair a fire, and then immediately get set on fire twice more, and I just burn out. It's incredible how much burning damage I take in this game. I get hit with high explosive ammunition, and I still take so much damage because the high explosive actually penetrates and does full damage even when they shoot it into my side. And as you can see, by the time the fire goes out, I lost about 40% of my hit points just to fire damage. I did actually play one really awesome game in the Furutaka, and it just so happens that it was the game that I played to film myself scraping along the border for the fake apology video. Yep, that game ended up being the best game I ever played in the Furutaka, who knew? Because after I scrape along the border and waste a bunch of time, I make my way toward the enemy base and toward this southeastern island on Two Brothers that I like for the approach on the enemy base because it gives you a bunch of cover, and there are a few other islands as well. It's probably the best route, and something I'm gonna talk about in my map tactics on Two Brothers as well. And I see this teammate of mine Stick in his destroyer being chased not only by a destroyer that I saw before, but also by a cruiser that only just popped up from behind one of the smoke clouds that one of these destroyers planted. And I decide that I want to go head on against this cruiser, because if I can get off a good salvo, I can probably take him out in one shot and hopefully save my buddy here. I tell him to fall back and keep running toward me, and he takes one more big hit, but it seems like he's safe. Yep. And here I come around the corner, the Kuma is right in my sights, and bam, I smack him right in the citadel and take him out in one salvo. Delicious. That's the kind of thing where the Furutaka really does shine, is when she can actually use her alpha damage, because for a tier 5 ship, it has an amazing amount of alpha damage. However, most of the time you just cannot do that. It's very rare that you actually get to use your alpha damage in a manner that I just presented. And so don't rely on it. It's still bad that the rate of fire is so low and, you know, the damage high. Now I get a good broadside on this destroyer. Sadly, I don't hit him all that much. That's the slightly not so good accuracy on the Furutaka. But I do put some damage into him, and as soon as I can see him again, I will probably also have reloaded. I have popped my radar ability, and he turns into me, which is an incredibly big mistake because he's not going to be able to dodge me all that well. I miss a couple of ranging shots. I think about torpedoing, but nah, we'll just fire into him and take him out. Aim carefully, and boom, right in the engine, and he explodes. Now, that battleship that you just saw, I didn't really do anything big against it. I did some damage, but the destroyer took it out before he died. But then another battleship tries to defend their base, and he goes behind the island. I can still see him because of my fighter plane that is circling above the island, and I fire torpedoes on the left side of the island to hopefully get him. and then I try to maneuver to stay as close to this island as possible, because I want to make it very difficult for these planes to actually come and take me out. Because at this point I'm capping, and I actually end up hitting the battleship twice with my torpedoes, which is quite fantastic. The Miyogi not very happy about this. I was thinking for a second if I should go around the corner, fire some more torpedoes, and give him a broadside or two, but I was worried that he'd take me out and then we would lose the game, obviously, because I was carrying the game at this point. It was all on my shoulders, because if I couldn't cap it, everyone else was pretty far away, and this Wyoming is kind of susceptible to being torped by the carrier. And when you look at that, the Miyogi did not have a repair kit and burned to death. Quite the successful game, if I do say so myself. And now lastly, let's look at what commander skills and modules I think you should get on the Furutaka if you were to keep it. On tier 1, in my opinion, you should take the basics of survivability. Expert loader is also a possible choice, but basics of survivability is just so damn good. As you saw in that clip where I almost burned to death, having basics of survivability can really help you from just dying to fire. On tier 2 you should get expert marksman. The turret traverse time is the biggest problem with the Furutaka, and every little bit counts. Should they ever buff the Furutaka's turret traverse to better than 30 seconds, you could also think about taking fire prevention instead of expert marksman, because expert marksman is not gonna do all that much anymore. On tier 3 you should definitely take high alert. Cutting off 9 seconds from the repair crew reload is absolutely amazing and better than all of the other choices. On tier 4, in my opinion, you should take last stand, because being able to ship her along even with a broken engine and being able to just steer a little bit and correct your course while your rudder is destroyed is incredibly powerful and very important. If you're confident that that's never going to lose you a game, you could also take Demolition Expert for a little bit of extra fire chance, but I would really take Last Stand. And on tier 5 you should definitely take Preventive Maintenance. High explosive is the most used ammunition among all ship classes, and as such keeping your modules from breaking all the time is really important. For the upgrades in slot 1 I would definitely take Main Battery Modification 1, reason for that once again being that it keeps your turrets from breaking when they're being fired at. In slot 2 you should take either Main Battery Modification 2 or Gunfire Control System 1. Making your guns more accurate is definitely not a bad thing, but personally I prefer the better gun traverse and reload time of Main Battery Modification 2, as those are definitely the two worst things about the Furutaka at the moment. And in slot 3, in my opinion, you should definitely take Damage Control Modification. 5% less chance to be set on fire is much more prevalent than the Propulsion Modification would be. However, there is something said about Propulsion Modification if you don't have the upgrades from your commander yet. Oh, Furutaka, you surely are the low point of the Japanese cruiser line. The Japanese cruiser line is actually really fun to play, from the Tenryu at tier 3 that is kind of like a destroyer, over the really interesting gun setup on the Mogami, to the quite powerful Zao. The entire line is just really enjoyable, except for Furutaka. Furutaka is just bad. And it's absolutely because of the turret traverse, the rate of fire, and the really horrible Citadel hit zones. All three of those things just make the ship incredibly unfun to play, especially the low rate of fire, because it kind of feels like you're playing a really badly armored battleship. Good thing, however, that Wargaming realized this and that they're doing something about it. But I have to say, now that I unlocked the Aoba, I really wanted you all to be part of this very special moment of me selling the Furutaka and saying goodbye forever. Goodbye, Furutaka. Burn in ship hell, you terrible waste of space. If you enjoyed this review, please consider liking and subscribing, and if you have any feedback, leave it in the comments. I'm really sorry for the patchy upload cycle in the last couple of weeks, but I have worked through what I had to work through, and now I can put so much more time into YouTube again, which I'm really excited about because I do love making videos for you guys, and I'm very thankful that you all stuck around. Next will be a Donkey Double feature, now for the first time featuring a subscriber replay as well. But until then, I've been Eldritch Master Donkey, and I'll see you in another video.